Every year, thousands of people go missing. Some are found, but some vanish forever. In this video, we are covering the 10 of the strangest unsolved disappearances on record. Before we start, please hit subscribe if you enjoy true mystery. Let's begin. So let's talk about Vermont. Most people think maple syrup and fall leaves. Nice place, right? But there's a spot in southwestern Vermont that locals will tell you to avoid. Glastonbury Mountain, and if they know you well enough, they might mention the triangle, the Bennington Triangle. It's a stretch of wilderness, dense forest, steep ravines, abandoned logging towns, the kind of place where the trees grow so thick that even in the middle of the day, it feels like dusk. And between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished here. Not lost, vanished. No bodies, no blood, no clues. Now, here's where it gets strange. One of them was a hunting guide, a man who knew these woods better than his own backyard. Another was seen by witnesses seconds before she disappeared. And the third? He vanished from inside a moving bus. So the question isn't, could they have gotten lost? The question is, how do you lose people who should be impossible to lose? Let me walk you through the 3 cases that started it all. November 12th, 1945, Mitty Rivers was 74 years old. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. 74 sounds old. But this guy wasn't some frail retiree. He was a hunting guide. He'd spent his entire life in these woods. He knew every ridge, every stream, every hollow. If you were going to hunt in Glastonbury, you hired Mitty Rivers because he never got lost. On November 12th, Mitty was guiding a group of 4 hunters through Bickford Hollow, about 4 miles west of Bennington. It was late afternoon, around 3 o'clock, and the light was starting to fade. Winter comes early in Vermont, and by mid-November, the sun sets fast. So the group is heading back to camp. They're walking in a loose line, chatting, not worried about anything because Mitty's leading them. He's just ahead, maybe 30, 40 feet in front. And then Mitty says he's going to take a quick detour. Maybe he saw something. Maybe he wanted to check a game trail. The accounts vary, but the point is, he tells the group, "I'll meet you back at camp," and he walks over a small rise. Now, here's the thing. The guys he was with didn't think anything of it. This was Mitty Rivers. The man could navigate these woods blindfolded. So they keep walking. They get back to camp, and they wait and wait. Mitty never shows up. By nightfall, they're worried. By the next morning, they're panicking. They organize a search party, and this wasn't some small-town effort. Over 300 volunteers showed up. They brought in bloodhounds. They brought in a detachment of U.S. Army soldiers from Fort Devens. They combed every inch of Bickford Hollow for 8 days. And you know what they found? One single rifle cartridge. That's it. An unspent bullet sitting in a stream bed. No body, no blood, no torn clothing, no footprints leading anywhere. Just one bullet. Now, think about that for a second. If Mitty Rivers got injured, broke his leg, had a heart attack, whatever, his rifle would be near him. If he got attacked by an animal, there'd be blood, torn fabric, something. If he got disoriented and wandered off, he would have fired signal shots. That's basic survival protocol. 3 shots in the air, international distress signal. But he didn't fire any shots. The cartridge they found was unspent. It hadn't been fired. It was just lying there. So where did he go? The search was called off after 8 days. The official conclusion, he probably fell into a ravine or a crevice and was buried by leaves. But here's the problem with that. The area was searched thoroughly. Bloodhounds lose scent when a body's in water or buried deep, sure. But they should have picked up something, a direction, a trail, anything. They didn't. Mitty Rivers walked over a hill and ceased to exist. Exactly 1 year and 19 days later, it happened again. December 1946. Paula Jean Weldon was 18 years old. She was a sophomore at Bennington College, bright, outgoing, the kind of girl who had her whole life ahead of her. And on the afternoon of December the 1st, she decided to take a hike. Now, Paula wasn't dressed for a serious trek. She was wearing a bright red parka with a fur-trimmed hood, blue jeans, and sneakers. This wasn't a "let's conquer the mountain" outfit. This was a "let me go for a walk and clear my head" outfit. She told her roommate she was going to walk on the Long Trail, a popular hiking path that runs through the area. She left campus around 2:45 in the afternoon. And here's where the timeline gets interesting. Because Paula didn't just vanish in the middle of nowhere. She was seen by multiple people. First, a gas station attendant sees a girl matching Paula's description running near the college entrance around 3:15. Then, a man named Louis Knapp picks up a hitchhiker, young woman, red coat, and drives her to the start of the Long Trail. And finally, at around 4 p.m., an elderly couple, Ernest and Mrs. Whitman, are walking out of the trail as Paula is walking in. They stop and talk to her. They tell her, "It's getting dark. You're not dressed for this. You should turn back." Paula smiles, says she'll be fine, and keeps walking. The Whitmans continue down the trail. They walk maybe 100 yards, and then Mr. Whitman turns around, just a casual glance back. Paula is gone. Now, let me be very clear about what this means. The Long Trail at that section is a straight path. No sharp turns, no thick brush where you could duck off into the woods without being seen. It's open, and the Whitmans had only walked for a few seconds before they looked back. Paula Jean Weldon, wearing a bright red coat against a backdrop of gray winter trees, had somehow vanished in less than 30 seconds. The search for Paula was even bigger than the one for Mitty Rivers. Over 1,000 volunteers. The FBI got involved. Her father, Archibald Weldon, a successful engineer, pulled every string he had. They offered a $5,000 reward, which in 1946 was an enormous amount of money. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. Not a scrap of red fabric, not a footprint, not a single clue. Now, the theories started flying. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she was kidnapped. Maybe she committed suicide. But here's the thing. Paula's room was untouched. She'd left a check for her tuition sitting on her desk, uncashed. If she was planning to run away, why leave money behind? And if she was suicidal, why tell people where she was going? People who are about to take their own lives don't usually make casual conversation with strangers. And kidnapping? In broad daylight, on a trail with witnesses nearby, while wearing the most visible coat imaginable? It doesn't add up. The official conclusion? She probably got lost, wandered off the trail, and died of exposure. But here's the problem. They searched that area with airplanes. They flew over the forest looking for that red coat. In December, the trees are bare. There's no foliage. A bright red parka should stand out like a flare. They never saw it. Paula Jean Weldon walked into the woods and never came back. And to this day, not a single trace of her has ever been found. All right, so if the first two cases were strange, this one is impossible. December 1st, 1949. Exactly 3 years to the day after Paula Weldon disappeared, a man named James Tedford got on a bus in St. Albans, Vermont. He was 68 years old, a World War I veteran, and he lived at the Bennington Soldiers' Home. He'd been visiting relatives up north and was heading back. So Tedford boards the bus. His relatives see him get on. Other passengers confirm he's there. The bus starts its route south toward Bennington. And here's where it gets weird. The bus makes several stops along the way. At each stop, passengers get on and off. Some people doze, some people read. It's a normal bus ride. As the bus approaches Bennington, witnesses later say they remember seeing Tedford in his seat. He's there. He's real. He's not invisible. The bus pulls into the Bennington terminal. People start getting off, and James Tedford is gone. Now, here's the thing. His luggage is still in the overhead rack. An open bus timetable is sitting on his seat, like he'd just been looking at it. But James Tedford is nowhere to be found. The driver's confused. The passengers are confused. They search the bus. They check the bathroom. They look under the seats. Nothing. So the theories start. Maybe he got off at an earlier stop and everyone just forgot. Maybe he slipped off when the bus arrived and walked away before anyone noticed. But here's the problem. The bus made stops, yes, but each stop was accounted for. Passengers and the driver were interviewed. Nobody remembers Tedford getting off. And even if he did get off early, why would he leave his luggage behind? Why would he leave the timetable open on the seat like he was coming right back? People don't abandon their luggage unless something's wrong. The official conclusion? He probably got disoriented, maybe had a stroke or dementia episode, wandered off and died somewhere in the woods. But that doesn't explain why nobody saw him leave. That doesn't explain why his luggage stayed behind. And it definitely doesn't explain why, despite searches, no body was ever found. James Tedford got on a bus. Witnesses confirm it. And somewhere between St. Albans and Bennington, he stopped existing. Okay, so let's pause for a second and think about this. 3 people, 3 disappearances, all within a few miles of each other, all within 5 years. And in every single case, the explanation is the same. They probably got lost and died in the woods. Case closed, right? Wrong. Because when you actually look at the facts, that explanation falls apart. Let's start with Mitty Rivers. Mitty Rivers was a guide. He'd spent his entire life in these woods. He didn't get lost. So the question isn't, did he get lost? The question is, what happened that made it impossible for him to signal for help? Think about it. If he fell and broke his leg, he could still fire his rifle. 3 shots. Boom, boom, boom. That's the universal distress call. But he didn't fire any shots. The cartridge they found was unspent. So what? He just quietly sat down and died? Without trying to call for help? Without leaving a single footprint? That doesn't make sense. And Paula Weldon. Let's talk about that red coat. Paula was wearing the most visible piece of clothing imaginable. Bright red, against gray trees. In December, when the forest is bare. Air searches should have spotted her in minutes, but they didn't. And you know what else? The Whitmans saw her walking into the trail. They turned around seconds later, and she was gone. How far could she have gotten in 30 seconds? Even if she ran, she'd still be visible on a straight trail. There was no place to hide, no thick brush, no sudden drop-offs. So where did she go? And James Tedford? This one's the real head-scratcher. He was on a bus, with other passengers, with a driver, in an enclosed space. You can't just vanish from a bus, so what? He slipped out at a stop and nobody noticed? Fine. But why leave his luggage? Why leave the timetable open? People don't do that. When you get off a bus, you take your stuff, unless you don't plan to get off. So if he didn't plan to get off, what happened to him? Now, the official explanation is always the same. They got lost. They died of exposure. The forest is big, bodies decompose, case closed. But here's the thing. Over 3,000 people searched for these 3. The FBI got involved. The Army got involved. They had bloodhounds. They had airplanes. They combed every inch of the triangle. And in 3 separate cases, they found nothing. Not one bone, not one piece of clothing, not one shred of evidence. How is that possible? Even if you die in the woods, something gets left behind. Animals scatter bones. Fabric gets snagged on branches. Shoes stay where they fall. But in the Bennington Triangle, nothing stays. It's like the forest just takes people. So what happened in the Bennington Triangle? Was it just a series of tragic accidents? Random chance that 3 people happened to vanish in the same area over 5 years? Maybe. But here's what keeps me up at night. Mitty Rivers knew those woods better than anyone. He doesn't just wander off and die. Paula Weldon was visible. Bright red coat, broad daylight, witnesses nearby. She doesn't just disappear in 30 seconds. And James Tedford was on a bus with 14 other people. He doesn't just evaporate. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was aliens or Bigfoot or some kind of portal to another dimension. I don't know what it was, but what I do know is this. Something about that stretch of forest doesn't follow the rules. Because people go in, and they don't come out. And to this day, almost 80 years later, not a single trace of Mitty Rivers, Paula Weldon, or James Tedford has ever been found. The Bennington Triangle took them, and it's never given them back. So the next time you're hiking in Vermont and you see a trail marker for Glastonbury Mountain, maybe take a different path. Because some places, you just don't come back from. So before we talk about what happened to the Jameson family, we need to talk about what was happening before they disappeared. Because that's where this case stops being a normal missing persons case and starts becoming something else entirely. October 8th, 2009. Eufaula, Oklahoma. Bobby Jamison, 44 years old, his wife, Sherilyn, 40, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison. On paper, they're a normal family. They live in a small house. Bobby's got chronic back pain. Sherilyn has some mental health issues, bipolar disorder, off her medication. But they're managing. They're functional. And on this particular day, they're getting ready to take a drive up to the Sans Bois Mountains near Red Oak, Oklahoma. They're looking to buy a 40-acre plot of land. They want isolation. They want to live in a shipping container on a mountain, away from people. Now, here's where it gets strange. The Jamisons had a security camera on their property, just a basic home surveillance setup. And that camera recorded them packing their truck that morning. And when police later reviewed that footage, they didn't know what to make of it. Picture this. Bobby and Sherilyn are walking back and forth between the house and their Ford pickup truck, over and over, making dozens of trips, carrying random items, packing boxes, but they're not talking, they're not coordinating. They're not even looking at each other. They just move, slowly, like they're sleepwalking. Investigators described it as trance-like they were being controlled. One detective said it looked like they were under some kind of spell. Now, you might think, okay, maybe they were just tired. Maybe they were stressed. But here's the thing. Bobby and Sherilyn had been telling people for months that their house was haunted. They told their pastor that there were spirits in the house, that demons were on the roof, that they were engaged in what they called spiritual warfare. Sherilyn even wrote an 11-page letter, found later in the truck, rambling about witches and curses. So when you watch that security footage and you see two people moving like zombies, packing a truck like they're preparing for the end of the world, it hits different. And then they load up little Madison and they drive into the mountains. And they never come back. 8 days later, on October 16th, the truck is found. It's sitting on a dirt road in the Sans Bois Mountains about halfway up a remote trail. The area is dense forest, steep ravines, thick brush, the kind of place where you don't just stumble around. And when they find the truck, here's what they see. The truck is locked, doors locked, windows up, everything sealed tight. Now, let me walk you through what was inside that truck, because this is where the case stops making sense. Item number 1, their cell phones, both of them, just sitting there. Item number 2, their GPS device, still in the truck. Item number 3, their wallets, their IDs, everything you'd need to prove who you are. Item number 4, and this is the big one, $32,000 in cash, hidden under the driver's seat, $32,000. Now, here's the detail that keeps police awake at night. Inside the truck, locked in the cab, is their dog, a little white dog named Maisie, and Maisie is barely alive. She's been locked in that truck for 8 days with no food and no water. She's starving, dehydrated, but alive. So let's think about this for a second. If someone forced the Jamison family out of that truck, some kind of ambush, a robbery, whatever, why is the truck locked? You don't lock a truck after you kidnap someone. You leave it open. You leave it messy. You don't carefully seal everything up. And if Bobby and Sherilyn left voluntarily, if they decided to just walk into the woods for some reason, why did they lock the dog inside? They loved that dog. Maisie went everywhere with them. If they were planning to hike into the mountains, they would have taken her, or at the very least left the window cracked so she could breathe. But they didn't. They locked the doors, left the phones, left the GPS, left the money, and they walked away. But here's the question. Walked away to what? Or walked away from what? Now, here's where it gets even more unsettling. Police recovered Bobby's cell phone from the truck, and on that phone, they found the last photo the family ever took. It's a picture of Madison. She's standing on a rock, her arms are crossed, and she's not smiling. Some people look at that photo and say she looks unhappy, maybe scared. Others say she just looks like a bored 6-year-old. But here's the thing that bothers me. She's not looking at the camera, she's looking off to the side. Like something caught her attention, like she's staring at something or someone just out of frame. And that photo? It was taken at 12:53 p.m. The last outgoing call from their phones pinged a cell tower nearby at 2:18 p.m. And after that, silence. The Jamison family, along with their dog, vanished into the Sans Bois Mountains, and for 4 years, nobody knew what happened to them. November 2013. Two deer hunters are walking through the woods about 3 miles from where the truck was found, and they see something. Bones, 3 skulls, partial skeletons, scattered by animals, heavily decomposed. When the remains are recovered and examined, dental records confirm it. Bobby, Sherilyn, Madison. But here's the detail that makes investigators' blood run cold. The bodies were found lying side by side, face down, in a row. Now, think about that. If a family gets lost in the woods and dies of exposure, they don't line up neatly. They huddle together for warmth. They collapse where they fall. But the Jamisons were positioned, intentionally, face down in the dirt. That's not exposure. That's not an accident. That looks like an execution. But here's the problem. The bodies were so decomposed that the medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death. No bullet holes in the skulls, no broken bones, no toxins left in the tissue, just 3 skeletons lying in the dirt 3 miles from their truck. And no answers. All right, so let's talk about the theories, because this case has a lot of them, and every single one falls apart when you actually look at the evidence. Theory number 1. Drug deal gone wrong. This is the most common theory. The Sans Bois Mountains are known for meth production. Maybe Bobby and Sherilyn were involved in something illegal. Maybe they went up there to make a deal and it went bad. Okay, let's say that's true. Then why is there $32,000 in cash sitting in the truck? Drug dealers don't leave money behind. That's the whole point. You kill someone for the money, you take the money. But the cash was still there, untouched. So that theory doesn't work. Theory number 2, they faked their deaths. Some people think Bobby and Sherilyn staged the whole thing, that they wanted to disappear, start a new life, fake their deaths. All right, fine. Then whose bodies were found on the mountain? Dental records confirmed it was them. DNA confirmed it. Those were their remains. So unless they hired body doubles and somehow convinced them to die in the woods, that theory is dead on arrival. Theory number 3, murder-suicide. Maybe Bobby or Sherilyn snapped. Maybe one of them killed the others, then themselves. Okay, but here's the problem. Why walk 3 miles into thick brush with a 6-year-old child just to do that? Why not do it at the truck? Why not do it at home? And again, why lock the truck? If you're planning a murder-suicide, you don't carefully lock your vehicle and leave your dog inside to starve. That level of care and organization doesn't match someone in the middle of a psychotic break, so that theory doesn't fit either. Theory number 4, they were running from something. This is where it gets into the realm of the unexplained. Remember, Bobby and Sherilyn believed their house was haunted. They talked about demons, spiritual warfare, witches. The 11-page letter found in the truck was full of paranoid ramblings. So what if they weren't running to something? What if they were running from something? What if they believed, truly, genuinely believed, that something was after them, and they drove into the mountains to escape it? But here's the problem with that theory. If they were running from something supernatural, why did they die 3 miles from the truck? Why not stay in the truck? Why walk deeper into the woods? Unless whatever they were afraid of was in the truck with them, and they had no choice but to run. So what happened to the Jamison family? Was it drugs? Was it murder? Was it something else entirely? Here's what we know for sure. On October 8, 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison packed their truck like they were in a trance. They drove into the Sans Bois Mountains. They locked their truck with their phones, their money, and their dog inside, and then they walked 3 miles into the wilderness and died. 4 years later, their remains were found lying side by side, face down, like they had been executed. But no cause of death was ever determined. No suspects were ever named. No motive was ever confirmed. The only clue we have is that 11-page letter, the one about witches and curses, the one that Sherilyn wrote in the days before they vanished. And whatever was in that letter, whatever they believed was hunting them, they couldn't outrun it. Because the Jamisons didn't just disappear. They walked into something, and it didn't let them leave. So if you ever find yourself driving through the Sans Bois Mountains in Oklahoma, and you see an old dirt road leading up into the trees. Maybe keep driving, because some families go looking for peace and quiet, and what they find is something else entirely. This case is different. We're not talking about remote mountains or endless forests. We're talking about a bar in the middle of a college town on a Saturday night with cameras everywhere, and a man walks in, and he never walks out. March 31st, 2006, Columbus, Ohio. Brian Schaffer is 27 years old. He's a second-year medical student at Ohio State University. Smart guy, good-looking, popular, the kind of person who has his whole life mapped out ahead of him. But Brian's carrying something heavy. 2 weeks earlier, his mother, Renee, died of cancer, and Brian was close to his mom, really close. So he's grieving, he's trying to hold it together, but you can tell it's weighing on him. And on this particular night, April 1st technically, because it's just after midnight, Brian decides he needs to blow off some steam. So he calls up his friend, Clint Florence, and they go bar hopping in Columbus. They hit a few spots, they're drinking, they're talking, it's a normal night out. And then, around 1:15 in the morning, they head to a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Now, here's the thing about the Ugly Tuna. It's not just some random bar. It's on the second floor of a building called the South Campus Gateway. To get into the bar, you have to ride an escalator up from the ground level, and to leave, you have to ride that same escalator back down. There's also a service exit in the back, a freight elevator, and a door that leads to a construction area. But that exit is usually locked, and it's not meant for customers. So for all practical purposes, the Ugly Tuna is a box. You go up the escalator, you drink. You come back down the escalator. Simple, right? Now, here's where it gets strange, because Brian Schaffer goes up that escalator, and he never comes back down. 1:15 a.m. The security camera at the base of the escalator catches Brian and Clint riding up to the bar. Brian's wearing a white button-down shirt with a dark pattern. He's smiling, chatting with Clint. He looks totally normal, maybe a little buzzed, but functional. They get to the top, they go into the Ugly Tuna, they order drinks, they're hanging out near the bar, and then at 1:55 a.m., Brian is spotted on camera again. This time, he's standing just outside the entrance to the bar talking to two women, Amber and Danine. They're chatting, laughing. Totally casual. And then, at 1:57 a.m., Brian says goodbye to the women, turns around, and walks back toward the bar entrance. He steps out of the camera's view, and that's it. That's the last time anyone ever sees Brian Schaffer. Now, at 2 a.m., the bar closes, lights come up, the staff starts clearing people out, last call's over, time to go home. Clint and his girlfriend Meredith head downstairs. They wait outside for Brian. They wait and wait. Clint tries calling him, no answer. He figures, maybe Brian met a girl, maybe he left early, maybe he's already back at his apartment. So Clint leaves. But Brian didn't go home. Brian didn't go anywhere. When Brian doesn't show up the next day, his family gets worried. They report him missing. Columbus police start an investigation, and at first, they're thinking, okay, college kid, Saturday night, he probably crashed at a friend's place, he'll turn up. But then they check the security footage, and that's when they realize something is very, very wrong. See, the Ugly Tuna has a camera pointed at the escalator. It records everyone going up, everyone coming down. So the police sit down and watch the tape, every single frame, from 1:55 a.m., when Brian was last seen, until the bar closed and everyone left. And here's what they see. They see the two women Brian was talking to. They leave. They're on camera riding the escalator down. They see Clint and Meredith. They leave. On camera, they see the bartenders, the waitresses, the band packing up their equipment, the cleanup crew. One by one, every single person who was in that bar walks down that escalator, except Brian. Now, the police think, okay, maybe he used the service exit. So they check the back. There's a door that leads to a construction area, an unfinished part of the building. It's dark. It's a maze of scaffolding and concrete, not a place you'd wander into drunk at 2 a.m. But they check the cameras anyway. Nothing. They check the freight elevator camera. Nothing. They even account for the timing. They go through the footage frame by frame, matching every person who went up with every person who came down. And the math doesn't add up. More people went up than came down, but the only person missing is Brian Schaffer. So the police bring in search teams. They bring in cadaver dogs. They search the entire building, the bar, the construction site, the basement, the roof. They find nothing. No body, no blood, no sign of a struggle, no trace of Brian Schaffer. It's like he walked into the ugly tuna saloon and just stopped existing. All right, so let's talk about the theories, because people have been trying to solve this case for almost 20 years, and every theory hits a wall. Theory number 1. He slipped out the construction exit. This is the most popular theory. Maybe Brian, drunk and disoriented, wandered out the back service door into the construction area. Maybe he fell. Maybe he got trapped. Maybe he's buried in the building somewhere. Okay, let's think about that. First of all, that construction area was a death trap. It was pitch black. No lights, just scaffolding, exposed rebar, open pits. You'd have to be suicidal to wander around in there drunk. Second, the police searched that area extensively. They brought in dogs trained to detect human remains. If Brian had died in there, they would have found him. And third, and this is the kicker, there were officers stationed around the perimeter of the building that night. If Brian had stumbled out of the construction exit and onto the street, someone would have seen him. But nobody did. So that theory doesn't hold up. Theory number 2. He put on a disguise. Some people think Brian changed his clothes in the bathroom. Maybe he swapped shirts with someone. Maybe he put on a hat, something to alter his appearance so he could leave without being recognized on camera. All right, but here's the problem. Where did he get the disguise? He didn't bring a backpack. He wasn't wearing a coat. Are we supposed to believe he had a backup outfit hidden in the bar, or that he convinced a stranger to swap clothes with him for no reason? And even if he did change clothes, the police reviewed the footage looking for anyone matching his height and build. They accounted for every single person. They knew who everyone was. So unless Brian somehow shrunk himself or turned invisible, that theory doesn't work either. Theory number 3. He never left the building. This is the theory that haunts the case. Maybe Brian is still in the building. Maybe he's in the walls. Maybe he fell into a gap in the construction site and his body was sealed in when they finished the building. It's a horrifying thought. And honestly, it's the theory that makes the most sense. But here's the problem. The police brought in cadaver dogs. Those dogs are trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, and they found nothing. Now, could the dogs have missed something? Sure, it's possible. But we're talking about a thorough search. Multiple sweeps and 0 hits. So either Brian's body is sealed so deep that the scent couldn't escape, or he's not in the building at all. Theory number 4. He walked away. Some people think Brian staged his own disappearance, that he wanted to escape his life, start over, fake his death. And honestly, if you look at the circumstances, you could make that argument. His mom had just died. He was stressed. He was grieving. Maybe he couldn't handle it. But here's the thing. Brian left his car in the parking lot. He left his apartment untouched. His bank accounts were never accessed. His credit cards were never used. His phone never pinged another tower. If Brian Schaffer walked away, he did it without money, without ID, without a vehicle, and without ever contacting anyone ever again. And I'm sorry, but that's not starting over. That's vanishing into thin air. So what happened to Brian Schaffer? Did he fall into the construction site and get buried? Did he slip out a back door that no one saw? Did he walk away from his life and disappear forever? Nobody knows. And here's the part that makes this case so tragic. Brian's father, Randy, spent years searching for his son. He followed every lead. He never gave up hope. And then, in 2008, Randy Schaffer was walking on his property when a tree branch fell and struck him in the head. He died instantly. So now, Brian is gone. And his father is gone. And his mother was already gone. The entire family just erased. And to this day, Brian Schaffer remains one of the most baffling disappearances in modern history. Because this isn't a case of someone vanishing in the wilderness. This isn't a case of someone getting lost in the woods. This is a case of a man walking into a bar in the middle of a city, surrounded by cameras, surrounded by witnesses, and just ceasing to exist. The last image we have of Brian is that security camera footage. 1:57 a.m. He's smiling. He's turning around. He's walking back toward the bar. And then he steps out of frame, and the world never sees him again. So the next time you're out at a bar with friends, and someone says, "I'll be right back," maybe keep an eye on them, because Brian Schaffer said the same thing. And he never came back? All right, so this story starts in Paradise, February 11th, 1979, Maui, Hawaii. Picture this: crystal blue water, warm sun, gentle breeze. The kind of morning where the ocean looks like it's inviting you in. The kind of day where you think, let's grab the boat and go fishing. And that's exactly what 5 friends decide to do. Their names are Ralph Malayakini, Scott Moorman, Peter Hanchett, Patrick Woosner, and Benjamin Kalama. They're not professional fishermen. They're not Navy SEALs. They're just guys. Friends. Locals who grew up around the water and know how to handle a boat. And on this particular morning, they borrow a 17-foot Boston whaler called the Sarah Joe. It's a small boat, open top, built for day trips in calm waters, the kind of boat you take out for a few hours and bring back before dinner. So, around noon, they launch from Hana on the eastern coast of Maui. The plan is simple. Head out into the Alanui Haha Channel, do some fishing, maybe catch a few beers, and be back by sunset. Easy. Now, here's the thing about the Alanui Haha Channel. It's one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the Pacific. The locals know this. The currents are brutal. The wind can turn on a dime. Fishermen call it the Channel of Death, but on this particular morning, the ocean is calm, glassy, beautiful. So the 5 men head out, and for a while everything's fine. But then, around 1 p.m., something changes. The sky darkens, the wind picks up, and out of nowhere, a massive low-pressure system slams into the islands. We're not talking about a little rain shower. We're talking about a gale, 40-foot swells, winds strong enough to flip boats, the kind of storm that comes in so fast you don't have time to run. And the Sarah Joe, she's only 17 feet long. Against 40-foot waves, she's a toy. The last time anyone sees the boat, it's being swallowed by a wall of water. And then, nothing. By nightfall, the families are worried. By the next morning, the Coast Guard is mobilized. Planes, ships, helicopters, they comb the channel, they search the coastline, they scan the water for debris, life jackets, bodies, anything. And they find nothing. Not a single piece of the Sarah Joe, not a life vest, not a cooler, not even a fuel slick. It's like the ocean just opened up and swallowed the boat whole. The search goes on for 5 days. And then, the Coast Guard calls it off. The official conclusion: lost at sea. The families hold memorial services. They grieve. They try to accept that their loved ones are gone, drowned in the channel, taken by the Pacific. And for most people, that's where the story ends. The ocean takes people. That's what it does. Fishermen, sailors, swimmers, it doesn't matter. If the ocean wants you, it keeps you. Case closed. But here's the thing. Usually, that is where the story ends. The ocean keeps its secrets. But not this time. Fast forward, almost a decade. September 9th, 1988. We're not in Hawaii anymore. We're in the Marshall Islands, specifically a place called Taongi Atoll, also known as Bokak Island. Now, if you've never heard of Taongi, that's because almost nobody goes there. It's one of the most remote, desolate places on Earth. It's a tiny strip of coral and sand in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No people, no buildings, no fresh water, just sand, coral, and seabirds. And it's 2,300 miles from Maui. That's not a typo. 2,300 miles. That's the distance from Los Angeles to Chicago. So on this particular day in 1988, a team of marine biologists lands on Taongi to do a wildlife survey. They're counting bird populations, cataloging coral, doing research. And one of the biologists, a man named John Naughton, is walking along the beach when he sees something that doesn't belong. Half buried in the coral, battered and bleached white by the sun, is a fiberglass boat hull. Now, Naughton's seen plenty of debris wash up on remote islands, fishing nets, plastic bottles, driftwood. But a whole boat? That's unusual. So he walks over, he brushes away the sand, and stamped on the side, faded but still visible, is a registration number, HA5621M. Naughton doesn't recognize it, but something about it feels wrong. So he writes it down. When he gets back to civilization and runs that number through the Coast Guard database, his hands start shaking. It's the Sarah Joe, the boat that vanished off the coast of Maui in 1979. The boat that 5 men were on when they disappeared into the storm. And it's been sitting on this deserted island, 2,300 miles from home, for 9 years. Now, here's the detail that makes this even stranger. John Naughton, he wasn't just some random biologist. He had participated in the original search for the Sarah Joe back in 1979. He'd spent days flying search patterns over the Alenuihaha Channel, looking for survivors, looking for wreckage, looking for anything. And 9 years later, on a beach on the other side of the Pacific, he's staring at the boat he thought he'd never see again. What are the odds? Now, here's where the story stops being strange and starts being terrifying. Because Naughton didn't just find the boat. He starts walking around the island trying to figure out what happened, trying to piece it together. And just yards from where the Sarah Joe is beached, he sees something, a pile of coral rocks, not scattered, not random, stacked, deliberately arranged in a mound. And on top of that mound, driven into the sand, is a cross made of driftwood. It's a grave. Naughton freezes. He radios for help. A team is assembled. They fly back to the island with proper excavation equipment, and they carefully dig. Inside the grave, they find human remains, a jawbone, some vertebrae, fragments of bone, and something else, something strange, a stack of weathered papers, government forms, surveys, documents, interleaved with thin sheets of aluminum foil, placed deliberately, like an offering. The remains are sent back for analysis, dental records are pulled, and the identification comes back. The bones belong to Scott Moorman, one of the 5 men from the Sarah Joe. But here's the thing that keeps investigators awake at night. The grave wasn't just a pile of rocks covering a body. It was constructed. Someone dug into the sand. Someone placed Scott's remains inside. Someone stacked the coral stones on top. Someone carved that driftwood cross and drove it into the ground. Scott Moorman didn't bury himself. Someone was on that island with him. And whoever it was, took the time to give him a proper burial. All right, so let's stop and think about this. The Sarah Joe vanished in 1979. 9 years later, it shows up on an uninhabited island 2,300 miles away. And one of the crew, Scott Moorman, is buried in a carefully constructed grave. So the question is, how did they get there? And what happened to the other 4 men? Let's break this down. First, let's talk about the distance. 2,300 miles is an insane distance for a small boat to drift, but experts say it's possible. The North Equatorial Current flows west across the Pacific. If the Sarah Joe got caught in that current after the storm, it could have drifted for months. Some oceanographers estimate it would take about 3 months to drift from Maui to Taongi. 3 months on a 17-foot boat with no motor, no food, no fresh water. So here's the question. How did any of them survive? The Sarah Joe wasn't equipped for a long voyage. It was a day-trip fishing boat. There was no shelter, no supplies, no desalination equipment. If they drifted for 3 months, they would have died of dehydration within a week, unless they made landfall somewhere else first, somewhere with water, somewhere they could survive. And then they tried to leave again and ended up at Taongi. But if that's true, where did they land? And why would they leave? Now, let's talk about the grave. Scott Moorman didn't bury himself. That's physically impossible. So at least one other person survived long enough to dig that grave, to stack those rocks, to make that cross. Which means the question isn't, did anyone survive? The question is, who buried Scott, and where did they go? Option 1. One or more of the other 4 men survived the landing on Taongi. They buried Scott, and then they died somewhere else on the island. But here's the problem. Taongi is a tiny island. It's flat. You can see from one end to the other. There's no jungle, no caves, no place to hide. When the survey team searched that island, they found one grave, one set of remains. If the other 4 men died on that island, where are they? Their bodies should be there, but they're not. Option 2, the other 4 men buried Scott, then were rescued by a passing ship. This is one of the leading theories. Maybe a fishing boat, possibly operating illegally in protected waters, found the survivors. Maybe they took them aboard. But here's the thing. If they were rescued, why didn't they go home? Why didn't they contact their families? Not a phone call, not a letter, not a word, for 9 years, and then forever. They just disappeared. Option 3, the other 4 men tried to leave. Maybe after Scott died, they couldn't wait on that barren island. Maybe they thought, no one's coming, we have to save ourselves. So they built a raft from pieces of the Sarah Joe, where they tried to patch the boat, and they sailed off into the Pacific. And they never made it. If that's what happened, their bodies are at the bottom of the ocean, and we'll never find them. But here's the detail that doesn't fit: the grave. Specifically, the aluminum foil and the paper squares. Why would someone bury government survey papers with a body? And why interleave them with tinfoil? Some researchers think it looks like joss paper, a traditional Chinese funeral offering. It's placed with the dead to bring them wealth in the afterlife. But the crew of the Sarah Joe wasn't Chinese, they were Hawaiian. So who buried Scott Moorman? Was it one of his friends using materials they scavenged? Or was it someone else, someone who found the body later? And if it was someone else, who were they? Where did they come from? And why didn't they report finding a dead body on a deserted island? There's a dark theory that illegal fishing crews sometimes operate in the Marshall Islands, that maybe they found Scott's body and buried it out of superstition or respect, but they couldn't report it because they weren't supposed to be there. Or maybe, and this is the one that haunts me, maybe the other 4 men were picked up by a boat, but not rescued. Maybe they were taken, forced to work, and they never made it home. So, what happened to the crew of the Sarah Joe? Did they drift for months across 2,300 miles of open ocean only to die one by one on a deserted island? Did they survive long enough to bury their friend only to vanish into the Pacific forever? Or were they picked up by someone who erased them from the world? We'll never know. Because the ocean gave back the boat, it gave back one body, but it kept the other 4. And here's the part that gets me. Scott Moorman was buried with care. Someone took the time to dig that grave, to stack those stones, to make that cross. Whoever did it cared. But they never told anyone. They never reported it. They just left. And Scott stayed there, on that tiny strip of sand in the middle of nowhere, waiting for someone to find him. And 9 years later, John Naughton, one of the men who had searched for him in 1979, finally did. So if you ever find yourself out on the ocean and the sky turns dark and the waves start to rise, remember the Sarah Joe. Remember that the Pacific is vast and hungry, and it doesn't forget. It took 5 men in 1979, and 9 years later, it gave back one grave. And somewhere out there, the other 4 are still drifting. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're somewhere we'll never find. But someone knows. Someone who buried Scott Moorman and walked away. Someone who's never told the story. And maybe they never will. The story starts the way a lot of American tragedies do, with a simple Sunday drive, December 7th, 1958, Portland, Oregon. Picture this. It's the holiday season. Christmas is coming. The air smells like pine and wood smoke. Families are decorating their homes, stringing lights, putting up trees, and the Martin family decides to take a trip. Kenneth Martin, 54 years old, his wife Barbara, 48, and their 3 daughters, Barbie, 14, Susan, 13, and Virginia, 11. They pile into their car, a 1954 Ford station wagon, and this car is distinctive. Cream white body with bright red splash guards. The kind of car you notice, the kind of car you remember. And on this particular Sunday, they're heading out to the Columbia River Gorge to collect Christmas greens. That's what people did back then. They'd drive out into the woods, cut some holly branches, some pine boughs, and bring them home to decorate for the holidays. It's wholesome. It's Americana. It's a family tradition. So they load up the car and head east along Highway 30, following the Columbia River. And for most of the day, everything is perfectly normal. They stop for gas, they grab burgers at a diner in the Dalles, the girls are laughing. Kenneth and Barbara are relaxed. It's a good day. But then, the sun starts to set. And in December, in the Pacific Northwest, the sun sets early. By 4:30 p.m., it's already getting dark, and the weather turns, the rain starts. Not a drizzle. That heavy, freezing Pacific Northwest rain that comes down in sheets and turns the roads into black mirrors. The Martin family pays their check, gets back in the Ford, and heads west toward home. And that's the last time anyone sees them alive. Now, here's where the timeline gets murky. Because the Martins were seen after they left the diner. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the distinctive cream and red Ford driving along Highway 30 that evening. One witness, a truck driver, said he saw the car pulled over on the side of the road near Cascade Locks around 6 p.m. The headlights were on, the engine was running, but he didn't stop. Another witness said they saw the Ford at a gas station later that night, around 8 p.m., but this witness couldn't be sure it was the same car. And after that, silence. Kenneth Martin doesn't show up for work on Monday. The girls don't go to school. Barbara doesn't answer the phone. By Tuesday, the family is officially reported missing, and the search begins. For weeks, there's nothing. No trace of the car, no sign of the family. The police search the highways, they check hospitals, they interview witnesses, they put out bulletins. And then, in early January, investigators find something. Near Cascade Locks, along a particularly treacherous stretch of Highway 30, they discover tire tracks, fresh tracks, leading right off the edge of the road. And at the bottom of the cliff, 200 feet down, is the Columbia River. They examine the rocks, and embedded in the cliff face, they find chips of paint, cream white and red. And then, snagged on a bush halfway down the cliff, they find something else, a glove. It's Barbara's. The assumption is immediate. The Martins skidded off the road in the rain. The car went over the cliff. They drowned in the Columbia River. Tragic, but explainable. Case closed, right? Except the case wasn't closed because they never found the car. The Columbia River is deep, fast, cold. The current is brutal. If a car goes in, it doesn't just sit there. It gets swept downstream. It gets buried in silt. So for months, the river keeps its secret. And then, in May 1959, a fishing boat snags something underwater. They bring in divers, they bring in recovery equipment, and they pull up a car. A 1954 Ford station wagon, cream white with red splash guards. It's the Martins' car. The divers open the doors, and inside they find 3 bodies: Kenneth, Barbara, and Virginia, the youngest daughter. But here's the thing that makes this discovery even more horrifying. The other 2 daughters, Susan and Barbie, are not in the car. They're gone. Now, the assumption is that their bodies were swept out when the car hit the water. The Columbia River is powerful. It's entirely possible their bodies were washed downstream, carried miles away, and never recovered. But that's not the only strange thing they find. Because nearby, on the riverbank, not far from where the car was recovered, police find a .38 caliber handgun. It's Kenneth Martin's gun. And it had been fired. All right, so let's pause for a second and think about this. The official story is that the Martin family skidded off the road in the rain, went over the cliff, and drowned in the Columbia River. Tragic accident. Case closed. But here's the problem. That story doesn't explain everything. Let's start with the gun. Kenneth Martin owned a .38 caliber revolver. It was registered, legal. He kept it in the car. But when police found it, it wasn't in the glove box, it wasn't in the trunk, it was outside the car, on the riverbank, and it had been fired. Recently, 1 casing was missing. So the question is, why? If this was just a car accident, why was Kenneth's gun out? Why was it fired? Did he fire a shot before the crash? Was he trying to signal for help? Was he defending his family from something or someone? Or did the gun discharge during the crash and the casing was lost in the chaos? The police never found the missing bullet. They never found the casing. They never determined when or why the gun was fired. It's just there, a detail that doesn't fit. Now, let's talk about Susan and Barbie. The official explanation is that their bodies were swept out of the car by the current and carried downstream. And yeah, that's possible. The Columbia River is powerful. Bodies can travel miles. But here's the thing. Kenneth, Barbara, and Virginia were all found inside the car. The doors were closed, the windows were up. So if the car was sealed when it hit the water, how did Susan and Barbie get out? Did the impact break a window? Did the doors pop open for a moment and then slam shut? It's possible. But it raises another question. If Susan and Barbie were swept out of the car, why weren't Kenneth, Barbara, and Virginia also swept out? Why were only some of the bodies removed by the current? It doesn't make sense. And then there's the timeline. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the cream and red Ford after the estimated time of the crash. The truck driver saw the car pulled over near Cascade Locks around 6 p.m. The tire tracks and the glove were found in that same area. But another witness said they saw the Ford at a gas station around 8 p.m., 2 hours later. So if the car went off the cliff at 6 p.m., who was driving it at 8 p.m.? Was the witness mistaken? Did they see a different car? Or did something else happen between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. that we don't know about? So, here's the theory that some investigators have quietly considered. What if it wasn't an accident? What if someone ran the Martins off the road? What if Kenneth pulled over because someone flagged him down? What if there was a confrontation? That would explain the gun. That would explain why it was fired. And what if, after the confrontation, the car and the bodies were pushed over the cliff to make it look like an accident? That would explain the tire tracks. That would explain the glove halfway down the cliff, as if someone had tried to climb out. But it doesn't explain the missing daughters. Unless Susan and Barbie weren't in the car when it went over, unless they ran or were taken. So what happened to the Martin family? Was it just a tragic accident? A family skidding off a rain-slicked road in the dark, plunging into the icy Columbia River? Or was it something else? The fired gun says it was something else. The missing daughters say it was something else. But the official report says, accident, case closed, and for decades that's where the story ended. Kenneth, Barbara, and Virginia were laid to rest. Susan and Barbie were presumed drowned, their bodies lost to the river. And the Martin family became just another sad story from the 1950s, a reminder to drive carefully in the rain. But here's the thing. The gun was never explained. The missing bullet was never found. And the two daughters were never recovered. And every year, on December 7th, people in Oregon remember the Martin family, the family that went out to collect Christmas greens and never came home. So if you ever find yourself driving along Highway 30 through the Columbia River Gorge on a dark, rainy night, and you see a car pulled over on the side of the road, headlights on, engine running, maybe stop, maybe check, because the Martin family pulled over on a night just like that. And whatever happened next, the river kept it secret. Until it didn't. All right, so we all know the name, D.B. Cooper. The man who hijacked a plane, extorted $200,000 and parachuted into the night, never to be seen again. It's one of those stories that's become legend. The gentleman thief, the guy who beat the system, the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. But here's the thing. When you actually break down what he did, when you look at the details, you realize this story isn't about a genius. It's about a man who either pulled off the impossible or made the stupidest decision in criminal history. So let's start at the beginning. November 24th, 1971. Portland International Airport, Oregon. It's Thanksgiving Eve. The airport is packed. Families are traveling. People are rushing to catch flights. And in the middle of all this chaos, a man walks up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter and buys a ticket. One way. Portland to Seattle, $20. Cash. He gives his name as Dan Cooper. Now, let's talk about what this guy looks like. He's in his mid-40s, about 6 feet tall. Dark hair. He's wearing a black business suit, a white shirt, a narrow black tie, and a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He's also wearing dark sunglasses, even though it's overcast and raining outside. He looks like an executive, a businessman, the kind of guy you wouldn't give a second glance. He boards Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727. It's a short flight, Portland to Seattle, 30 minutes in the air, no big deal. Cooper takes a seat in the back of the plane, row 18, window seat. The plane takes off at 2:50 p.m., and about 15 minutes into the flight, Cooper does something that changes everything. He orders a bourbon and soda, he pays in cash, he lights a cigarette, and then he pulls out a note. He hands it to the flight attendant, a woman named Florence Schaffner. Now, Schaffner's used to this. Guys on planes hand her notes all the time. Phone numbers, pickup lines. She assumes it's just another passenger trying to flirt, so she doesn't read it. She just smiles politely and puts it in her pocket. And Cooper leans over and says very calmly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner's smile disappears. She pulls out the note, and it says, in block letters, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You are being hijacked." Schaffner sits down. Cooper opens his briefcase, just a crack, and shows her what's inside. Red cylinders, wires, a battery. It looks like a bomb, and just like that, Cooper is in control. Now, here's what makes DB Cooper different from every other hijacker in history. He's calm, he doesn't scream, he doesn't wave a gun, he doesn't threaten the passengers. In fact, the passengers don't even know they're being hijacked. Cooper stays seated in the back. He sips his bourbon, he smokes his cigarette. He's polite. He even tips the flight attendant. Meanwhile, Schaffner relays his demands to the cockpit, and Cooper's demands are very specific. He wants $200,000 in cash, unmarked bills, $20 denominations. He wants 4 parachutes, 2 primary chutes, 2 reserve chutes, and he wants the plane to land in Seattle, refuel, and then take off again, heading south toward Mexico City. The pilots radio ahead. The FBI is notified. The money is gathered. The parachutes are pulled from a local skydiving school, and at 5:24 p.m. the plane lands at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The passengers are told there's a minor mechanical delay. They have no idea what's happening. Cooper makes the exchange. The money and parachutes are brought aboard, and in return, Cooper releases all 36 passengers, but he keeps the flight crew, the pilots, the flight attendants. He needs them because he's not done yet. The plane takes off again at 7:40 p.m., and this time, Cooper gives very specific instructions. He wants the plane to fly at 10,000 feet, not higher, not lower. He wants the landing gear down. He wants the flaps set to 15 degrees. He wants the plane to fly slow, around 170 knots, just above stall speed. And he wants the rear air stair, the built-in staircase at the back of the 727, left unlocked. The pilots are confused. This flight configuration is bizarre, dangerous even, but they comply, because Cooper still has the bomb, so the plane is in the air, flying south, low and slow. Cooper sends the flight attendants to the cockpit. He tells them to close the curtain and stay there. He doesn't want to be disturbed. And then, he's alone in the cabin, just Cooper, the money, the parachutes, and the dark. Now, here's what we know about the conditions outside. It's night, pitch black, no moon. It's raining, freezing rain, the kind that turns to ice the second it hits you. The temperature at 10,000 feet is around 7 degrees Fahrenheit, and with the wind chill from the plane's speed, around 200 miles per hour, the effective temperature is somewhere around 70 degrees. And Cooper? He's wearing a business suit, a trench coat, loafers, no helmet, no gloves, no jumpsuit. He's dressed for a business meeting, not a parachute jump into a freezing rainstorm. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the pilots feel a sudden change in the plane's pressure. A warning light flashes on the dashboard. Aft air stair deployed. The plane lurches upward slightly, a phenomenon that happens when you suddenly lose weight from the back of the aircraft. Cooper has opened the rear staircase, and then, somewhere over the dark forests of southwestern Washington, he steps out into the void. And he's gone. The FBI launches the largest manhunt in American history. They search the forests of Washington. They interview witnesses. They comb through the wreckage of the plane for clues. And they find nothing. No body, no parachute, no sign of Cooper. The case goes cold. For 9 years, DB Cooper is a ghost, a legend, the man who got away. And then, in February 1980, something happens. A young boy named Brian Ingram is camping with his family at a place called Tina Bar on the banks of the Columbia River. He's digging a fire pit in the sand when his shovel hits something. He pulls it out. It's a bundle of cash, $20 bills, rotting, decomposed, held together by rubber bands that crumble when he touches them. Brian's father calls the police. The FBI arrives. They check the serial numbers, and the bills match. It's Cooper's money. But here's the problem. Tina Bar is miles away from the calculated drop zone. The FBI had searched the area where they thought Cooper jumped. This wasn't it. So how did the money get there? Did Cooper land near the river and lose the bag? Did the current carry it downstream? Or did Cooper survive the jump, bury the money there years later, and walk away? The FBI estimates that only about $5,800 of the original $200,000 was found at Tina Bar. So, where's the rest? All right, so here's where the story splits into two camps. Because when you look at what D.B. Cooper did, you're left with one of two conclusions. He was either a genius or a suicidal idiot. Let's break it down. Most experts, skydivers, pilots, FBI agents, think Cooper died on impact, and here's why. The parachute. Cooper asked for 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve. The FBI gave him what he asked for. But here's the thing. One of the reserve chutes they gave him was a training chute. It was sewn shut, non-functional, used only for classroom demonstrations. And Cooper took it. He didn't inspect the chutes, he didn't test them, he just grabbed one and jumped. If he used the training chute, it didn't open, and he fell 10,000 feet into the forest. The clothing. Cooper jumped in a business suit, no helmet, no gloves, no thermal protection. At 70 degrees wind chill, exposed skin gets frostbite in seconds. His hands would have been useless. He couldn't have steered the chute. He couldn't have pulled the ripcord properly. The landing zone. The area where Cooper jumped is dense forest, tall trees, rocky terrain. Even experienced skydivers with GPS and daylight struggle to land safely there. Cooper jumped at night, in the rain, with zero visibility. The odds of him landing without impaling himself on a tree or breaking his neck are astronomically low. So, according to this theory, Cooper died. His body decomposed in the forest. Animals scattered the bones, and we'll never find him. Case closed. But if Cooper died, where is he? The FBI searched for years. They brought in cadaver dogs. They used helicopters. They combed the forests, and they found nothing. No body, no parachute, no shred of clothing, not even a bone. So, if he died, how did the forest completely erase him? And here's the other thing. Cooper knew exactly how to hijack a 727. He knew about the rear air stair. He knew the flight configuration needed to deploy it safely. That's not common knowledge. That's specialized. That suggests military training. Maybe special forces, maybe a paratrooper. And the money? Only a fraction of it was ever found. If Cooper died with the money, where's the rest? Did he bury it? Did he spend it? Did he launder it over the years? The serial numbers were logged. The FBI tracked them for decades, and except for the bills found at Tina Bar, none of them ever turned up. Not in a bank, not in circulation, nowhere. So either Cooper never spent the money, or he was smart enough to get rid of it in a way that left no trace. And then, there's the location of the money. Tina Bar is miles from the drop zone. The FBI calculated that if Cooper jumped where they think he did, the money shouldn't have ended up there. So how did it get there? Theory 1. The money bag broke open during the jump. The bills scattered. Some ended up in the Columbia River. The current carried them downstream to Tina Bar. But if that's true, why were the bills still bundled? Why were the rubber bands still intact? Theory 2. Cooper landed, buried the money at Tina Bar, and walked away. But why would he bury it there and never come back for it? Unless he couldn't come back, because he died somewhere else. Or he buried it there on purpose, to throw the FBI off his trail, to make them think he died. So what happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he die in the freezing rain, his body lost to the forest? Or did he land, stash the money, and disappear into a new life? We'll never know, because D.B. Cooper is the only hijacker in American history who was never caught, never identified, never found. The The FBI officially closed the case in 2016. They said they'd exhausted all leads, but they never found a body. And here's the part that gets me. Cooper had every opportunity to mess up, to panic, to make a mistake. But he didn't. He was calm, polite, methodical. He ordered a bourbon. He tipped the flight attendant. He said, "Thank you." And then he stepped out of a plane into a freezing rainstorm, wearing loafers and a suit, and vanished into the night. Either he's the luckiest man who ever lived, or the craziest. So the next time you're on a plane and you look out the window into the dark, remember D.B. Cooper, the man in the black tie who jumped into the void and never came back. Or maybe he did, and we just don't know it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so scared, so genuinely terrified that you stopped making sense? That your brain just shut down and you couldn't think straight? Couldn't make decisions? Because that's the only explanation for what happened on that mountain. February 24th, 1978, Chico, California. 5 friends pile into a car after a basketball game. They're in high spirits. They just won. They're laughing. They stop at a market and buy snacks. Hostess pies, Pepsi, some candy bars, classic post-game munchies. Their names are Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. They're all in their 20s and early 30s. And here's the thing you need to know about them. They all had mild intellectual disabilities. Some had developmental delays. Gary Mathias was a diagnosed schizophrenic who took medication to manage his condition. But they were high-functioning. They held jobs. They drove. They played on a Special Olympics basketball team. They had lives. They had families who loved them. And on this particular night, they were planning to drive home to Yuba City, about an hour south, so they could rest up for another basketball tournament the next day. The route home was simple. Highway 70, straight shot. They'd driven it 100 times. So they get in the car, a turquoise and white Mercury Montego, and they head out. And somewhere along the way, they make a decision that defies all logic. Instead of driving south toward home, they turn east, and they drive 50 miles up into the Plumas National Forest, into the Sierra Nevada mountains in the middle of winter, during a blizzard. Now, here's where the timeline gets strange, because nobody knows why they turned. There's no reason. Highway 70 is clearly marked. It's a well-lit road. There's no way to accidentally end up in the mountains. But that's exactly what they did. They drove up a narrow, winding mountain road, higher and higher, into the snow, into the dark. And then, around midnight, they encounter a man. His name is Joseph Schons. Schons had been driving through the mountains earlier that evening when his car got stuck in the snow. And while he was trying to dig himself out, he had a heart attack. He's sitting in his car, chest tight, struggling to breathe when he sees headlights coming up the road. It's the Mercury Montego. Schons is relieved. He thinks, "Thank God, someone's here. They can help me." He calls out to them. He waves. He shouts for help. And here's what happens next. The car stops. The headlights stay on for a moment, and then the lights go off, the engine shuts off, and the 5 men inside go silent. Schons calls out again. "Hey, I need help, please." Nothing. He can see them in the car. He can see their silhouettes, but they don't move, they don't respond. And then, after several minutes, Schons sees flashlights. The men have gotten out of the car. They're walking around, talking quietly, but they won't come near him. And then the flashlights go out, and everything goes quiet. Schons is terrified. He doesn't understand what's happening. He thinks maybe they're planning to rob him, or worse, so he stays in his car. He doesn't move. He's too weak to run. And eventually, he passes out. When he wakes up the next morning, the Mercury Montego is gone. And so are the 5 men. Now, here's the question that haunts this case. Why didn't they help him? Joseph Schons was having a heart attack. He was calling for help. He wasn't a threat. So why did they turn off their lights? Why did they hide from him? Who did they think he was? Days go by. The families report the men missing. A search is launched, and on February 28th, 4 days after the basketball game, the Mercury Montego is found. It's sitting on a mountain road about 4,400 feet up in the Plumas National Forest, miles and miles from where they should have been. And here's the thing that makes no sense. The car isn't wrecked. It isn't broken down. The engine is fine. There's gas in the tank. The car is just stuck. One of the wheels is high-centered on a snowbank. It's not deeply buried. It's not trapped. 5 grown men could have easily pushed it out, but instead, they abandoned it. And here's what they left behind. The keys were gone, but the windows were down. One of the doors was open. Inside the car, they found most of their supplies, the snacks they bought, their jackets, their wallets. But some things were missing. Flashlights, maps, a few personal items, which means they didn't panic and run. They chose to leave. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. They didn't walk down the mountain, toward civilization, toward warmth, toward help. They walked up, deeper into the forest, into the snow, into the blizzard. And the temperature that night? Around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and dropping. Weeks go by. The snow is too deep to search properly. The families wait, the police wait. And then, in June, when the snow finally melts, a group of motorcyclists are riding through the forest, and they find a body. It's near a Forest Service trailer, about 19 miles from where the car was abandoned. The body is identified as Ted Wire, one of the 5. And when investigators examine the scene, they realize something horrifying. Ted didn't die right away. He survived for 8 to 13 weeks in that trailer. They know this because his beard had grown long, because he'd lost approximately 100 pounds, because his body showed signs of prolonged starvation and exposure. Ted Wire, who weighed over 200 pounds when he went missing, wasted away to almost nothing in that trailer. But here's the part that makes this story go from tragic to incomprehensible. The trailer was stocked with supplies, not just a little food, enough food to feed all 5 men for a year. Military C rations, canned goods, dehydrated meals, everything neatly stored in lockers, and there was more. Outside the trailer, there was a propane tank. Enough fuel to heat the trailer for months. The Forest Service had left the trailer stocked for emergency situations. For people who got lost, for people exactly like Ted and his friends. But here's what investigators found. Ted had eaten some of the C rations. A few cans were opened, but the rest, untouched. The dehydrated meals in the locker, unopened. And the propane tank? The valve was never turned. Ted Wire froze to death in that trailer, starved to death, surrounded by food and fuel, and he never used them. All right, so let's stop and think about this, because this isn't just a mystery. This is a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that should never have happened. Let me walk you through what doesn't make sense. The car wasn't broken. It wasn't out of gas. It was just stuck in the snow. They could have pushed it out. They could have walked down the mountain toward the town they came from. It was only a few miles, but instead, they walked up. 19 miles into the wilderness. Why? The only explanation that makes sense is fear. Maybe they thought someone was following them. Maybe Gary Mathias, the schizophrenic, was having a psychotic episode and convinced the others they were in danger. Maybe they saw something, or someone, that terrified them so deeply they decided the only safe place was up. But if that's true, what did they see? This is the detail that breaks my heart. Ted Wire survived for months in that trailer, and the whole time, he was surrounded by food, but he barely touched it. He opened a few C ration cans, but the bulk rations, the ones that required opening a locker or breaking a seal, he never touched. Why? Some investigators think it's a case of learned helplessness. Ted and his friends had intellectual disabilities. They were used to following rules, following instructions. And maybe they thought the food wasn't theirs, that they'd get in trouble if they ate it, that they needed permission. So they waited. And while they waited, they starved. The propane tank was right there. Outside the trailer, all they had to do was turn the valve. But they never did. Again, the theory is the same. They didn't understand. They didn't know how. Or they were too afraid to try. And so, they froze. Over the next few months, searchers find more bodies. Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga are found about 11 miles from the car. Their remains are skeletal. They died much earlier than Ted. Jackie Hewitt is found near the trailer. His body is partially scattered by animals. But Gary Mathias, the one who is supposed to be taking medication for his schizophrenia, is never found. And here's the strange part. Inside the trailer, investigators find Gary's tennis shoes, but Ted's leather boots, the ones he was wearing when he left the car, are missing. So the theory is this: Ted survived the longest. Gary stayed with him for a while. And then, at some point, Gary took Ted's boots, maybe because his own shoes were wet or falling apart, and tried to walk out, and he never made it. Gary Mathias is still out there, somewhere in those mountains. Or maybe he's not. So what happened to the Yuba County Five? Why did they drive up that mountain? Why did they abandon their car? Why did they walk 19 miles into the snow when they could have walked down to safety? And why didn't they save themselves when they had food, heat, and shelter right in front of them? The most likely explanation is fear. Gary Mathias, off his medication, may have had a psychotic break. He may have believed they were being chased, that someone was after them, and the others, trusting him, followed. Or maybe they were running from something real. Someone who scared them so badly, they chose to freeze to death rather than face them. We'll never know. Because Ted Wire is dead. Bill, Jack, and Jackie are dead. And Gary Mathias? He's a ghost. The only evidence of him is a pair of tennis shoes sitting in a trailer in the middle of nowhere. And somewhere, deep in the Plumas National Forest, there's a man who walked into the snow in his socks and never came back. So if you ever find yourself driving through the Sierra Nevada mountains on a winter night and you see headlights behind you, and then, suddenly, the lights go out, remember the Yuba County Five. The boys who were so scared they stopped making sense, who walked away from help, who sat in a warm trailer surrounded by food and chose to starve. Because sometimes fear isn't rational. Sometimes fear just erases you. And the Yuba County Five were erased, all except one, and he's still out there, somewhere in the snow. This story starts the way a lot of American summers do, with a graduation, June 6, 1992. Springfield, Missouri. It's the last day of high school for the class of Kickapoo High. Caps and gowns, diplomas, hugs, tears, the whole thing. And among the graduates are two best friends, Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall. They're both 18. 19 in Susie's case. They're excited. They're free. The whole world is ahead of them. After the ceremony, they do what every high school senior does. They party. They hit a few graduation parties around town. They're laughing, taking pictures, making plans. And at some point during the night, they decide they need a place to crash. Originally, they were supposed to stay at another friend's house, but when they get there, it's packed. Too many people, too loud, no room. So they decide to drive to Susie's house instead. Susie lives with her mom, Cheryl Levitt. Cheryl's 47, a hairdresser, single mom. She's got her own life, but she loves her daughter. The house is a small, single-story ranch at 17 on 17 East Delmar Street. Quiet neighborhood, safe. So around 2:15 in the morning, Susie and Stacy pull up to the house. They go inside. The lights are off. Cheryl's already asleep. And at some point during the night, maybe immediately, maybe hours later, something happens. And by the next morning, all three of them are gone. June 7th, 1992. Around 8:02 a.m., a group of friends shows up at the house. They're supposed to go to a water park. Big day, celebration. They knock on the door. No answer. They knock again. Nothing. So they try the door, and it's unlocked. They walk inside, and immediately something feels wrong. The house is silent. Too silent. The air feels heavy, stale. And in the living room, the television is on. But it's not playing anything. It's just static. White noise. That hissing, crackling sound that fills the room. And then they see the dog, a little Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon. She's in the corner, shaking, whimpering, clearly terrified. The friends call out, "Susie, Stacy, Mrs. Levitt?" No answer. They walk through the house, the bedrooms, the bathroom, the kitchen. Nobody's there. The beds are made. Well, sort of. They've been slept in but not neatly remade, like someone got up in the middle of the night. Susie's makeup is sitting by the sink, removed. She'd been getting ready for bed. Everything looks normal, except nobody's home. And then one of the friends notices something. On the staircase leading down to the garage, lined up perfectly in a row, are 3 purses: Susie's, Stacy's, and Cheryl's, and inside those purses, everything. Keys, wallets, cash, cigarettes, driver's licenses, everything you'd need to leave the house. But the women are gone. Now, let me stop and explain why this detail is so important. Because this is the thing that turns this case from a maybe they left voluntarily situation into a nightmare. Women don't leave their purses behind. Not one woman. Not 3 women. Especially not when the purses contain everything they'd need. Keys to the car, keys to the house, money, ID. If someone grabbed you in the middle of the night and said, "We're leaving, now," you'd grab your purse instinctively. But these purses weren't scattered. They weren't knocked over. They were lined up, neatly, on the stairs, like someone arranged them, like someone wanted them found. And here's the other thing. Cheryl Levitt was a smoker. So was Susie, and their cigarettes were in those purses. A smoker doesn't leave the house without cigarettes, especially not in 1992 when you could smoke anywhere. So the question is, if they didn't take their purses, their keys, or their cigarettes, how did they leave? And more importantly, why did they leave? The friends also noticed something strange outside. The porch light, the globe covering the bulb by the front door, is shattered. Broken glass is scattered on the porch, but the bulb itself, still intact. So someone didn't just unscrew the bulb, they smashed the globe. Why? Some investigators think it was a lure. Someone broke the light deliberately, knowing that Cheryl or Susie would come outside to check it, and when they did, they were grabbed. Others think it was an accident, a struggle, someone being shoved against the wall, but either way, that broken light is the only sign of violence. Because inside the house, nothing. No overturned furniture, no blood, no broken locks, just 3 purses, a shattered light, and a terrified dog. All right, so let's talk about what doesn't make sense, because this case has haunted Springfield, Missouri for over 30 years. And the reason it haunts people is because the logistics of it don't work. How do you abduct 3 women from inside a house without a fight? Cheryl was 47, but she wasn't frail. Susie was 19, Stacy was 18. These were grown women, and there's no sign of a struggle, no overturned lamps, no knocked over furniture, no screaming that the neighbors heard. So either the attacker had a weapon, something that made them comply immediately, or he knew them. Because if a stranger breaks into your house in the middle of the night, you fight, you scream, you grab something. But there's no evidence of that, which suggests the women either trusted the person who took them, or they were so terrified they didn't dare resist. Here's the other thing that bothers me. Yorkshire Terriers are loud. They bark at everything. Strangers, noises, shadows. But the neighbors didn't hear barking that night, so either Cinnamon knew the intruder, or she was too scared to make a sound. And when the friends found her the next morning, she was shaking, traumatized. That dog saw something, and whatever it was, it terrified her into silence. Now, here's the detail that makes every investigator want to scream. When the friends arrived at the house that morning, they noticed the answering machine was blinking. There was a message. So they hit play. And it was weird, muffled, maybe a voice, maybe just static. They couldn't tell. And then and this is the part that haunts the case, one of the friends accidentally deleted it. They were just trying to figure out what it said. They hit the wrong button, and it was gone. The police were able to pull phone records. They know a call came in around 8:00 a.m. that morning, right around the time the friends arrived, but they never recovered the message. So was it the kidnapper? Was it someone checking to see if anyone was home? Or was it just a wrong number? We'll never know. Over the years, there have been a lot of theories. Theory 1, a serial killer. Some investigators think it was a transient, a drifter, someone passing through Springfield who saw an opportunity. But that doesn't explain the control. Serial killers are messy, chaotic. This scene was almost neat. Theory 2. Someone they knew. This is the theory a lot of people lean toward. Maybe it was an ex-boyfriend, a jilted lover, a client of Cheryl's who became obsessed, someone who knew the layout of the house, who knew how to get them to open the door. But if that's true, why hasn't anyone been arrested? It's been over 30 years, and no suspect has ever been named. Theory 3. The parking garage. This is the one that sends chills down people's spines. In 1993, 1 year after the disappearance, construction began on a new parking garage at Cox South Hospital in Springfield. And almost immediately, rumors started. People said the 3 women were buried under the concrete, that someone with access to the construction site had disposed of the bodies there. A psychic even came forward and said she saw the women under the garage. In 2010, a ground-penetrating radar scan was done, and the results showed something, an anomaly, a void in the concrete that could be a grave. But the hospital refused to let investigators dig. They said it would be too disruptive, too expensive. And the evidence wasn't strong enough. So to this day, that parking garage sits there, and people in Springfield drive over it every day, wondering if the Springfield 3 are buried underneath. So what happened to Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall? Did someone break into the house in the middle of the night and take them by force? Did they open the door for someone they trusted and walk into a trap? Or did something else, something we can't even imagine, happen on that quiet street in Springfield? We don't know, because the women never came home. The house was eventually sold. New owners moved in. Life went on. But those 3 purses, lined up on the stairs, waiting for owners who would never come back, haunt everyone who hears this story. Because here's the thing. Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy did everything right. They stayed together. They locked the door. They were in a safe neighborhood, and they still vanished. No screams, no struggle, no trace, just a shattered porch light, a television playing static, and a dog too terrified to bark. So if you ever find yourself in Springfield, Missouri, and you drive past 1717 East Delmar Street, know that on the night of June 6, 1992, 3 women went to sleep in that house, and by morning, they were gone. And wherever they are now, buried under concrete, hidden in the woods, or somewhere we'll never find, they've been waiting for over 30 years, waiting for someone to bring them home. But nobody ever has. Let's go back to Christmas Eve, 1945. World War II had just ended. The boys were coming home. The world was trying to heal. And in Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sauter family was celebrating. George and Jenny Sauter, 9 children, a full house, laughter, candy, toys wrapped in newspaper, the smell of pine and wood smoke. It was the kind of Christmas Norman Rockwell would paint. The kids stayed up late. They were too excited to sleep. Presents, Santa, magic. But eventually, exhaustion won. The younger ones went to bed. The older kids, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5, climbed the stairs to their rooms on the 2nd floor. George and Jenny stayed up a little longer, making sure everything was ready for the morning. And then they went to bed too. It was quiet, peaceful. And then, around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny answered it. A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. She asked for someone who didn't live there, a wrong number. But here's the thing. The woman wasn't apologetic. She wasn't confused. She laughed, a strange, mocking laugh, and then she hung up. Jenny stood there for a moment, unsettled, but she shook it off. Wrong number. No big deal. She went back to bed, but she couldn't sleep. Because a little while later, maybe 1:00 a.m., she heard something. A loud thump on the roof, and then a rolling sound, like something heavy being dragged across the shingles. Jenny sat up, listened, and then she smelled smoke. Jenny bolted out of bed. "George, fire!" George was already awake. The smoke was thick, choking. They grabbed the 4 youngest children, Sylvia, Marion, George Jr., and John, and ran outside. The cold hit them like a wall. Snow on the ground, Christmas lights flickering on the neighbors' houses, and their house was burning, flames roaring out of the windows, black smoke pouring into the sky. And upstairs, trapped on the second floor, were Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. George didn't hesitate. He ran toward the house, but the stairs inside were already consumed by fire. He couldn't get through. So he ran outside. There was a ladder. He kept it leaning against the side of the house for roof repairs. He ran to where it should be. It was gone. He looked around frantically. It wasn't there. It had been there yesterday. But now, gone. Okay, fine. He'd find another way. George had 2 coal delivery trucks parked in the driveway. Big, heavy trucks. If he could drive one under the upstairs window, he could climb up on the roof of the cab and pull the kids out. He ran to the first truck, turned the key. Nothing. He tried again. The engine wouldn't turn over. He ran to the second truck. Same thing. Dead. Both trucks. Both of which had been running perfectly the day before. Panic was setting in now. George was screaming. The neighbors were starting to wake up. People were coming outside. Okay, water. He'd throw water on the fire, buy some time. There was a rain barrel next to the house, always full. George grabbed a bucket, ran to the barrel. It was frozen solid, not just ice on top, solid, like it had been frozen for days. But it hadn't been. It had been fine the day before. George stood there, bucket in his hand, watching his house burn. Every single tool he needed to save his children, the ladder, the trucks, the water, had failed. All at the exact same moment, and he had to stand there, in the snow, on Christmas morning, and watch his children burn. The fire consumed the house in 45 minutes. By the time the fire department arrived, hours later, it was just a smoking pile of ash. Now, here's where the story goes from tragedy to mystery. Because when the fire department finally arrived and started sifting through the debris, they expected to find bodies, 5 children, bones, skulls, teeth, something. A house fire is brutal. It destroys flesh. It chars bone. But it doesn't erase people. Even in the most intense fires, you find remains, fragments, proof that a human being was there. So the investigators sifted through the ashes. They searched the basement, the foundation, the rubble, and they found nothing. No bones, no skulls, no teeth, no jewelry, no metal buttons or belt buckles or shoe eyelets, nothing. The fire chief stood there, staring at the ash, and said, "They must have been completely cremated." And George Sauter looked at him and said, "How?" Because here's the thing. To cremate a human body, to reduce bone to ash, you need sustained heat of at least 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. For 2 hours, minimum. A standard house fire burns at around 100 to 1,500 degrees, and the Sauter house burned for 45 minutes. That's not enough, not even close. Even in a crematorium, a specially designed furnace, bones don't fully disintegrate. You have to grind them down afterward. So how did 5 children vanish? Where were the bones? All right, so let's talk about what doesn't add up. Because the official story that the children burned to death and were completely cremated doesn't hold up to even basic scrutiny. A house fire is hot, but it's not that hot. Wood burns, fabric burns, drywall crumbles. But bone? Bone is dense. It takes extreme sustained heat to destroy it. Forensic experts have tested this. They've burned pig carcasses, which are similar to human bodies, in controlled house fires, and every single time, bones survive. Charred, cracked, but there. So if the Sauter children died in that fire, their bones should have been in the rubble, but they weren't. Which means one of 2 things. Either the fire was way hotter than a normal house fire, hot enough to vaporize bone, which is almost impossible without accelerants or a furnace, or the children weren't in the house when it burned. Here's another detail that doesn't fit. After the fire, investigators checked the phone line, because Jenny had tried to call the fire department, but the phone was dead. And when they examined the line, they found something strange. The wire wasn't burned through. It was cut. Someone had climbed the utility pole outside the Sauter house and cut the phone line with pliers before the fire started. So, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't faulty wiring or a knocked-over candle. This was deliberate. And then there's the ladder. George kept a wooden ladder leaning against the house. He used it all the time for repairs. But on the night of the fire, it was gone. Days later, they found it. It had been thrown into a ditch 75 feet away from the house, so someone moved it before the fire to make sure George couldn't use it, and the trucks. Both of George's coal delivery trucks were in perfect working order the day before the fire, but on Christmas Eve, neither one would start. George was a mechanic. He knew engines, and after the fire, he had both trucks inspected. The mechanics found that the electrical systems had been tampered with. The distributors were removed. So, someone sabotaged the trucks to make sure George couldn't use them to rescue his children. And then there are the witnesses. Multiple neighbors reported seeing strange things that night. One woman said she saw balls of fire being thrown onto the roof of the solder house, like Molotov cocktails. Another man said he saw the solder children in a car the next morning with several men driving out of town, and a bus driver said he saw the children at a rest stop days later, far from Fayetteville, but none of these reports were investigated properly. The authorities dismissed them as hysteria, grief, confusion. So if the children didn't die in the fire, what happened to them? Here's where the story gets dark. George Sauter was an Italian immigrant. He'd come to America in 1908. He was proud, hardworking, successful, but he was also vocal. In the 1940s, during World War II, a lot of Italian Americans supported Mussolini. It was a cultural loyalty thing, nationalism. But George hated Mussolini. He spoke out against fascism publicly, and that made him enemies. In the months before the fire, George had been threatened multiple times. One man, an insurance salesman, told George, "Your house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." George threw him off his property, and then, 3 months later, his house burned down. So, the theory, the one the Sauter family believed for the rest of their lives, is this: the mafia, or a fascist sympathizer group, kidnapped the 5 children. They cut the phone line, they moved the ladder, they sabotaged the trucks, and then they set the house on fire to cover their tracks. The children weren't killed, they were taken and sold, or given away, or raised in secret by another family. Somewhere out there, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sauter grew up under different names, with different lives, and they never came home. For years, George and Jenny Sauter refused to believe their children were dead. They put up a billboard on Highway 16. It had photos of the 5 children and a reward, $5,000 for information. That billboard stayed up for decades. George died in 1969, still searching. Jenny died in 1989, still hoping. But here's the part that haunts me. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter in the mail. No return address. Postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph. It showed a man, middle-aged, dark hair, strong jawline, and on the back, someone had written, "Louis Sauter, I love brother Frankie, lil boys, A90132. Jenny stared at that photo for hours because the man in the picture looked exactly like her son Louis would have looked as an adult. She hired a private detective, gave him the photo, told him to go to Kentucky and find this man. The detective left, and he was never heard from again. No report, no phone call, no follow-up. He just vanished, and the Sauter family never got answers. So what happened to the Sauter children? Did they die in that fire, their bones somehow vaporized by impossible heat? Or were they taken, spirited away into new lives, their identities erased? We'll never know, because the fire destroyed the evidence. But it didn't destroy the questions. And to this day, people in West Virginia still talk about the Sauter children, the 5 kids who vanished on Christmas Eve, the 5 kids whose bones were never found, the 5 kids who might have lived somewhere out there, under different names, waiting for someone to recognize their faces and bring them home. Story starts on February 9, 2004. University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Maura Murray is 21 years old. She's a nursing student, track athlete, Dean's List. By all accounts, she's got her life together, but in the days leading up to February 9th, something changes. She starts acting strange. On February 5th, she's working her campus security job when she receives a phone call. After that call, she breaks down completely. Her supervisor finds her catatonic, staring at nothing. She can't speak. Nobody knows who called. Nobody knows what was said. Then, on February 9th, she emails her professors. She says there's been a death in the family and she'll be out for a week. But here's the thing. There was no death, no funeral. Her family had no idea what she was talking about. It was a lie. That same day, Maura goes back to her dorm room and starts packing. And I don't mean she throws some clothes in a bag. I mean she packs. She boxes up her belongings. She takes the posters off her walls. She empties her drawers, like she's not coming back. Then, she goes to an ATM and withdraws $280, almost all the money in her account. She goes to a liquor store and buys vodka, Bailey's, Kahlua, and boxed wine. And then, around 4 p.m., she gets in her car, a black 1996 Saturn sedan, and drives north. Into the White Mountains of New Hampshire, into the snow, into the dark. And nobody knows why. Around 7 p.m., Maura is driving on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. It's a winding 2-lane road, narrow, unforgiving. Snowbanks piled high on either side. It's pitch black, no streetlights, no houses, just trees and snow and darkness. And then she hits a sharp curve. The car doesn't make it. The Saturn spins out. The front end slams into a snowbank. The airbags deploy. The car is disabled. But Maura is okay. She's conscious. She's able to move. And within minutes, a witness arrives. His name is Butch Atwood. He's a school bus driver who lives nearby. He's driving home when he sees the crashed car. He pulls over, walks up to the Saturn. Maura is standing outside the car, or sitting in the driver's seat. Accounts vary. But Butch can see she's shaken, maybe injured, definitely rattled. He asks if she's okay, if she needs help, and Maura says something strange. She says, "No, I've already called 8AA, they're on the way." Butch is skeptical, because he knows there's no cell service on this stretch of road. He's lived here for years, you can't make calls here. But Maura insists, she doesn't want the police involved. So Butch says, "All right, I'll call for help anyway." And he drives the short distance to his house. He gets inside. And at 7:43 p.m., he calls 911. The police station is only a few miles away. And at 7:46 p.m., the first officer arrives. That's a 7-minute window. 7 minutes between the crash and the police arrival. And when the officer pulls up to the scene, Maura is gone. The police officer steps out of his cruiser. The Saturn is still there. The airbags are deployed. The windshield is cracked. But the car is locked. The doors are locked. The windows are up. And Maura Murray is nowhere to be found. The officer searches the immediate area, shines his flashlight into the woods, calls out, nothing. He searches the car. Inside, he finds her cell phone, her AAA card, her belongings. But the alcohol, the bottles she bought that afternoon, gone. Maura took the alcohol, but she left everything else. And she vanished in 7 minutes. All right, so let's break this down. Because this case has haunted investigators for over 20 years. And the reason it haunts them is because the logistics don't work. Let's start with the most obvious question. If Maura ran into the woods, where are the footprints? There was fresh snow on the ground, not a blizzard, but enough that footprints would be visible. The police searched the woods, they searched the roads, they brought in dogs, they brought in helicopters, and they found no footprints leading away from the car. Not into the woods, not down the road, nowhere. So if she didn't walk into the forest, where did she go? Here's where it gets even stranger. Tracking dogs were brought in the next day. Bloodhounds trained to follow scent trails. They picked up Maura's scent at the car, and they tracked it down Route 112, heading east for about 100 yards. And then the scent just stopped. Not faded, not scattered, stopped, like she vanished into thin air. Now, there are only a few things that can make a scent trail disappear like that. Water, a vehicle, or death. But there's no water on that stretch of road, no river, no stream. So, the only explanation is that Maura got into a vehicle. But whose? And then there's the rag. When police examined the Saturn, They found a white rag stuffed into the exhaust pipe. Now, Maura's father, Fred Murray, later said he'd told Maura to do this if the car started smoking. It was an old trick. The rag would supposedly reduce visible exhaust smoke. But here's the thing. Why would Maura stuff a rag into her tailpipe after crashing the car? The car was disabled. The engine was off. She wasn't driving anywhere. So why bother? Unless someone else put it there. And if someone else put it there, why? Some investigators think it was an attempt to stage a suicide, to make it look like Maura was trying to kill herself with carbon monoxide poisoning. But if that's true, it didn't work, because the car was off, and there's no body. And then there's the missing alcohol. Maura bought bottles of liquor that afternoon. They were in the car, but when police arrived, they were gone. So, Maura took them with her. Why? If she was planning to run into the woods and disappear, why take the alcohol? It's heavy, bulky, inconvenient. Unless she knew she was getting into a vehicle, and she wanted to take it with her, or unless someone else took it, to cover up evidence, to make it look like she ran. Over the years, there have been a lot of theories about what happened to Maura Murray. Theory 1, she ran into the woods and died. This is the official theory. The New Hampshire State Police believe Maura ran into the woods, maybe to avoid a DUI arrest, and succumbed to hypothermia. But here's the problem. There were no footprints. The dogs lost her scent on the road. And despite extensive searches, no body has ever been found. The White Mountains are vast, dense. It's possible her body is still out there, hidden by terrain or animals. But 20 years? And not a single bone, not a scrap of clothing? It's hard to believe. Theory 2, the tandem driver. This is the theory a lot of people believe. The idea is that Maura wasn't alone, that someone was traveling with her, either in a second vehicle or meeting her at a predetermined location. The tandem driver theory explains a lot. It explains why she had no clear destination. She was following someone. It explains why the dogs lost her scent. She got into the other vehicle. It explains why she took the alcohol. She was planning to meet someone. But if this is true, who was the driver? And what happened to Maura after she got in the car? Theory 3. She was picked up by a stranger. This is the darkest theory, that Maura, standing by her wrecked car on a dark, freezing road, accepted a ride from a passing stranger. And that stranger didn't take her where she wanted to go. There's a name that comes up a lot in this case. A local man who lived near Route 112, a man with a history of violence against women. But he's never been charged. And without a body, there's no case. Theory 4. She ran away. Some people think Maura staged the whole thing, that she wanted to disappear, start a new life. Her dorm was packed. She withdrew money. She lied about a family emergency. Maybe she was running from something. Debt, depression, a relationship. But here's the problem. Her bank accounts were never touched. Her credit cards were never used. Her social security number was never flagged. If Maura Murray is alive and living under a new identity, she's done it without leaving a single trace, and that's almost impossible. So, what happened to Maura Murray? Did she run into the woods and die, her body hidden by snow and time? Did she get into a car with someone she knew, a tandem driver, and something went wrong? Or did she accept a ride from a stranger who took her somewhere she never came back from? We don't know, because Maura Murray vanished in 7 minutes. 7 minutes between the crash and the police arrival. And in those 7 minutes, she made a choice, or had a choice made for her, that erased her from existence. Her father, Fred, searched for her until the day he died in 2021. He never got answers. Her family still searches. Her case is still open. And every year, people drive down Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, and they see the spot where her car crashed. They see the snowbanks, the trees, the darkness, and they imagine a young woman standing by her wrecked car, watching headlights approach in the distance. And they wonder, did those headlights belong to someone who helped her, or someone who hurt her? Because here's the thing about Maura Murray. She didn't vanish into the woods. She vanished into the silence. The silence of the snow, the silence of the night, the silence of a 7-minute gap that swallowed her whole. And that silence, it's never been broken.